Shadow the Hedgehog. To some, he's the greatest rival Sonic has ever had. He's the ultimate life form to Sonic's fastest thing alive, the Virgil to his Dante, the Vegeta to his Goku. To others, however, he's the original Sonic recolor. Another example of Sonic Team ripping off Dragon Ball, Cold Steel except unironic and actually canon. But if there's one thing about Shadow that cannot be denied, it's that the guy has stood the test of time. Hell, he's the only Sonic character to ever get a mainline title dedicated to him. No, Knuckles Chaotix and Tails Adventure are spin-offs, they don't count. Now Dr. Robotnik's Mean Beam Machine, that counts. Following Shadow's revival in Sonic Heroes, SEGA felt like there was still more to explore with this Black Hedgehog. And with the increasingly growing fan demand to give Sonic a gun for some reason, they decided it was finally time for Shadow to take center stage. And man,
Can you see all of me? Walk into my mystery. Step inside and hold on for dear life.
before we get into it, I want to give a quick thanks to my friend Nova Arby for letting me borrow his GameCube copy of Shadow the Hedgehog. I could have emulated it, but typically I prefer to play games on official hardware. Unfortunately, Shadow the Hedgehog on GameCube is just way too expensive for what it is, and the PS2 versions of Sonic games are just kinda worse across the board. Not even in a fun way, they're just worse. As I talked about in my Sonic Adventure 2 video, Shadow the Hedgehog continues the trend of multiple story campaigns in Sonic games. In total, Adventure has 7, Adventure 2 has 3, Heroes has 5, 06 has 4, and Shadow the Hedgehog has 326! 327 if you want to count the last story. For Shadow's first solo adventure, Sonic Team decided to shake up the formula and attempt an honestly ambitious way of telling its story. The game starts with Shadow the Hedgehog on the outskirts of a big city. Following his revival in Sonic Heroes, Shadow has been left with amnesia ever since, completely unaware of who he is and where he came from. All he has is a memory of him with a little girl named Maria, running away from a group of gun soldiers before she is shot and killed. A newspaper flies by and reveals that a huge comet is finally returning to Earth after 50 years. Soon after, a giant portal opens above the city, unleashing an army of revolting, inky beasts, beginning an alien invasion of the planet. As Shadow tries to not my problem the situation, the leader of the aliens appears before him, telling him to collect the Chaos Emeralds. Realizing this alien knows him, Shadow runs off to find the Chaos Emeralds, hoping that doing so will help him discover who he is. While Sonic Adventure 2 started off with 2 very quick yet instantly attention-grabbing beginnings, Shadow starts off with something equally as fast yet much more complex. A lot is introduced all at once, but it doesn't feel that confusing or overwhelming. It hits right at the heart of what the game is about: identity. What comes next, however, is dependent on you. Rather than following a single linear story, Shadow instead opts for a choose-your-own-adventure styled structure, with each stage offering 2 or 3 different mission objectives. Every playthrough is 6 stages long, but what stages and what order is decided by which mission you complete. These missions are divided into 3 categories: Dark, Neutral, and Hero. As an example, the first stage in every playthrough, Westopolis, has you either defeat 35 gun soldiers for the Dark mission, defeat 45 Black Arms for the Hero mission, or simply grab the Chaos Emerald at the end of the level for the Neutral mission. Once you complete a task, the routes immediately split, with the Dark route taking you to Digital Circuit, the Hero mission taking you to Lethal Highway, and the Neutral mission taking you to Glyphic Canyon. Regardless of which way you go, you will always have a choice in where you'll go next. Conceptually, this structure is actually a great idea for a 3D platformer. Not only does it allow for a ton of replayability, but it can allow for the exploration of Shadow's character from multiple angles. But you want to know the challenge with this specific approach? Every level and its associated plot would need to be able to make sense for every possible story sequence before and after it. If it doesn't, it can make it incredibly hard for a story to properly come together. And if that doesn't happen, these moments can end up feeling isolated and unrelated to each other. it can result in something utterly nonsensical. But don't worry, I got some great news. I lied, there is no great news. The game does exactly this. Let me break down one of these routes. After Westopolis, the gun commander is given a report about what's going down. When the commander is told about a black hedgehog being sighted among the chaos, he demands that the soldiers kill both the Black Arms and Shadow, claiming that Shadow is a threat regardless of what they think. We cut back to Shadow and Sonic, having defeated 45 Black Arms. Black Doom appears, telling Shadow to retreat after they have found a third Chaos Emerald. During the evacuation, Shadow catches up and demands the Chaos Emerald, telling him he won't listen to his orders but doesn't want to fight. Black Doom summons Black Bull, which is destroyed by Shadow and Sonic. The President, inspired by Sonic and Shadow, hopes to fight back and not surrender to terrorists. Shadow warps to Prison Island in the hopes of finding a Chaos Emerald, before remembering he escaped from here in Sonic Adventure 2. After Shadow finds a fourth emerald, Eggman decides to protect the planet from the Black Arm invasion so that he can rule it. Shadow and Black Doom ride atop an ancient floating temple as they prepare to continue their attack, only to be met with Eggman's fleet. Once Shadow destroys Eggman's fleet to enable Black Doom's attack, the President is evacuated, hoping to keep fighting despite acknowledging their failure to protect Earth. Shadow defends the President before having his full memory returned to him. He realizes that he is actually an android that Eggman created to replicate the original Shadow, and says that he will kill Eggman. Teaming up with Omega, Shadow obtains all 7 Chaos Emeralds, kills Eggman, and proclaims he will now start a robot uprising using Eggman's empire. Okay, so, question. Why did Shadow know to go to Prison Island to look for an emerald? When did these flying temples become a thing? Why would Shadow stop Black Doom from killing the President despite enabling and assisting in his invasion of Earth, while also claiming he doesn't actually care about any of this and just wants the emeralds for himself? Why does Shadow's memories coming back to him make him think he's an android copy of the original Shadow, and when were androids ever a part of the equation? Well, you see, most of these answers are actually explained in different stages that I didn't play, but because I did it in this weird order, these things just kinda happened with no rhyme or reason. Rarely in Shadow the Hedgehog does it feel like you're watching a coherent narrative. The story of each stage feels like it was written with a very specific route in mind, namely ones where you're the most consistent in your decision making. Yet even then, the only parts that feel like they matter are at the end. A story where your decisions affect the plot is a great idea, but the game's writing just does not do a good job at supporting that. Now, you could argue that Sonic has never really been about making the story make sense. Sure, the Sonic Adventures did it, but at the time, every other game worked exactly like this one. You could go from a hilly, grassy field to a chemical plant to a carnival, and it doesn't need to make sense. Hell, the game that came out right before this one, Sonic Heroes, did this too. In response, I'd argue that those games weren't trying to tell a story. Those games barely had any story whatsoever. Sonic Heroes was explicitly meant to be a throwback to those kinds of stories and tones that you got in the older games, except this time with the characters and personalities we had come to know and love. Meanwhile, Shadow the Hedgehog is trying to tell a story. It's the entire premise of the game. Every playthrough is about Shadow discovering who he is and what he's meant to be. It's literally on the back of the box. Uncover the truth about Sonic's arch rival. Embark on a journey to unveil his true identity. The way you play the game will determine the outcome of Shadow's future. Why is the gun commander black? So if the game advertises itself with a focus on a non-linear narrative, I think it's worth noting that the story doesn't make sense when you do things non-linearly. While it's certainly admirable, I just don't think Sonic Team had the writing quality to make such an ambitious concept work. But what about those individual moments? What about the characters? Maybe when taken as a whole it's a mess, but when isolated, there are some great story beats to extract. Well, I have some bad news. I'm not lying this time, it is bad news. Even when taken on its own, these scenes just don't work. I feel like a large part of my issue with the story is how joyless it feels. Tonally, the game takes itself way too seriously. It tries so hard to be melodramatic, but so much of it falls flat when I feel like I don't know any of these characters, let alone care about what's even happening. Starting with Heroes, the Sonic cast had ballooned to a very sizable number, and I guess SEGA felt obligated to feature as many characters as possible in pretty much every entry going forward. Eventually, this led to complaints about Sonic's annoying friends, mainly from people whom I don't think it's a stretch to say didn't actually like or cared about Sonic anymore and just wanted to dunk on the series. I never agreed with this mentality. I like the extended cast and think each one of them brings something unique and fun to the table. However, this is under the assumption that they're written like a character and not just a thing that follows you around the level, telling you what to do and yelling at you for fighting back against enemies that are attacking you. The vast majority of the game's cast is only here to be here. Only a small handful truly serve a purpose in any given playthrough. Shadow, Black Doom, Dr. Eggman, the Gun Commander, Maria, and Gerald Robotnik matter. The rest exist purely to represent a mission objective, usually one that's completely unrelated to anything that matters. Even Sonic feels like he's only important because he has to be. All he really does is push the plot forward in the pure hero routes. Another carryover from Heroes is the characters talking to each other during each level. It's honestly something I quite liked from this era of Sonic. It really helps better show off each character's personality, something I think the series has always been great at doing. Too bad they don't say anything other than the mission objective and calls for you to stop attacking the enemy type that's on their side, despite the game encouraging the defeat of enemies of specific alignments, every enemy attacking you regardless of what side you're on, and or their defeat literally being required to progress in the level. In Sonic Adventure 2, I felt like each character was able to be likable despite the poor localization, in large part due to the strong personalities conveyed through the voice actors. In Shadow the Hedgehog, not only is there little character present in the script, but this was also the game that marked the debut of the 4Kids voice cast in the video games. 4Kids as a dubbing company is already infamous for their tendency to butcher shows in order to make them as child-friendly as possible. See One Piece. But the voice direction used in those shows was also very child-focused. Performances were always super over the top and goofy. In some shows, I think this approach worked quite well. Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh, for example, have beloved dubs that played a huge role in making those shows iconic and their franchises the successes they are today. Now, while I don't want to speak on the Sonic X dub due to not having seen it in almost 2 decades, I do want to say that switching to the cast known for silly, child-friendly performances in the game that's trying to be dark, serious, and edgy probably wasn't the best idea. I have no hate for the 4Kids cast. I have my fair share of nostalgia for these voices. But it really feels like there was no attempt to change their vocal directions when migrating over. This refusal to change makes any scene trying to take itself seriously impossible to take seriously. And that's every scene in the damn game. Oh my god, speaking of damn, anytime Shadow curses, it feels so incredibly forced. It's hilarious. I'm sorry, there's not a lot of good I can say about this game's story. It's bad. From the structure to the writing to the direction, it just doesn't work. You know what does work? The gameplay. For the most part. Listen, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be so negative, I swear. I don't have anywhere near the same number of complaints as I did with the story. Even if it sounds like I do, I just need you to believe me, okay? A recurring element throughout Shadow the Hedgehog that is quite apparent is how much it carries over from Sonic Heroes. The general framework of each level is very much akin to what you found in that game in terms of general mechanics. You run through the level, homing attack enemies, jump around from platform to platform, grind rails, and light speed dash through rings. However, instead of the team-based gameplay from Heroes, you now have a completely different system. Guns! Lots and lots of guns! Also vehicles! Those are pretty important, but people don't really talk about that part. For as silly as the gun stuff is, it doesn't play that bad. Honestly, the gunplay here feels pretty decent. Once you pick up a weapon, firing it is as easy as pressing a button, and thankfully, it's really natural to use. There's also a pretty wide variety of them, from normal guns like pistols, to made-up alien weapons, to even close-range ones like swords. The close-range weapons suck ass, but it's really cool that they're here at least. Honestly, I think the best kinds of guns are the ones that aren't realistic. All the traditional human weapons work exactly how you'd think, and as a result, they're all kinda boring outside of stuff like the minigun. While the alien weapons function very similarly to the human ones, they're just inherently more interesting with some truly bizarre designs. The best weapons, however, are the special weapons you unlock for getting specific endings. Weapons like an egg vacuum, a huge samurai sword, a gun that calls down satellite lasers, and my personal favorite, a gun that shoots Omochao heads. These weapons are just so wacky and fun to use. Sure, you can find other weapons that do the same thing, but not only are the special weapons some of the strongest in the game, but I'd also rather kill a bunch of enemies with Omochao than bullets. On the other hand, vehicles are more of a mixed bag. Conceptually, I think they're a much better idea than the guns, but in execution, they range from fantastic additions that shake up the gameplay in new, unique ways, to, I can run faster than this, why am I in this car? The best vehicles are the ones that interact with the level design in new ways that Shadow just can't. The air saucer lets you double jump and float over poisonous rivers and acid, while the jump vehicle lets you jump super high and reach new platforms. The next best are the cannon vehicle, which moves slow but has a super strong machine gun with infinite ammo and no reloading, and the gun motorcycle, which, while it doesn't do anything unique, is just cool. There's a reason why Shadow riding a motorcycle is iconic. Finally, there's the gun vehicle, the convertible, and the HMMWV, all of which don't do anything unique from each other. The gun vehicle is used to cross toxic surfaces, but not only does the air saucer do the exact same thing, it also has a double jump. And it also just controls better. Again, Shadow can run faster than all of these vehicles. If it doesn't have anything to offer me besides being a vehicle, I just don't see the need for it. Another important mechanic with mixed results is the Chaos Blast Chaos Control system. At the top of the screen are two bars that fill up with each good or bad action you make. Killing gun soldiers fills up the red meter, while killing black arms fills up the blue meter, for instance. When the red meter is full, you can use Chaos Blast, which has you exploding and nuking everything around you, while the blue meter does Chaos Control, which has you speeding through the level in a normal stage or temporarily slowing down all enemies in boss fights. While Chaos Blast was repeatedly useful, I found Control to be almost antithetical to what the hero missions regularly asked of you. Both mission types typically require you to hunt things down in each level. Chaos Control literally skips over parts of the level, making it almost guaranteed you'll miss something needed for the hero mission, and making you have to backtrack through that section anyway. It doesn't feel like this was properly thought through, and all that really mattered was implementing Chaos Control in a similar fashion to what we saw in Sonic Adventure 2. In case you didn't pick up on it in the last paragraph, it's time to get negative again! Why does Shadow control like ass? Seeing as this game reuses so much of its framework from Sonic Heroes, I just don't understand why Shadow feels so much worse to control. It's like this weird marriage of the feel of Heroes and the feel of Tails and Eggman in Sonic Adventure 2. When you try to turn one way or the other, there's like a second delay. It's like you've been temporarily locked into one direction. Much like with Sonic Adventure 2, you can get used to these controls and even start to have some fun. The key difference, however, is that SA2 actually feels really good to control. You just have to get used to some of the weirdness. Whereas here, I feel like I'm able to have fun despite the controls. Oh, and I can't forget the camera. On GameCube, you have to use the C stick to turn the camera, which really sucks because the C stick is awful, and even if it was on PS2 or Xbox, I'm sure I'd still hate it. The camera doesn't feel good. However, the biggest problem I have with the gameplay of Shadow the Hedgehog is simultaneously the mission objectives and the level design. For the most part, I think the levels are designed pretty well. The problem is when a mission objective requires you to hunt down something. Once that happens, the level can go from pretty good to some of the worst levels I've ever played in a Sonic game. You have to crawl and scrape and replay the level over and over and over again to find every enemy, every item, every point of interest that's hidden behind a path you didn't even realize was there due to needing to unlock it, or maybe it's just that well hidden. Something worth noting is that a single route in Shadow the Hedgehog can actually go by really quickly. By the end of the game, I was able to finish in a little over an hour, but it was in large part because I had played these levels so much I knew where to go. You wanna know something funny? That's how long it took me to finish some of these levels the first time! And the experience of doing so was fucking miserable! But the worst level, the worst fucking level by far, is the Doom. This level is a maze that reuses the exact same chunks of rooms with only slight differences. Even just getting to the goal ring and escaping in the neutral mission is a headache. The game gives you a map, but this map is fucking horrible, and you can only find it on very specific walls scattered throughout the level, sometimes in dead ends. Killing 60 gun soldiers for the Dark mission is the worst experience I had playing this game. And to top it all off, it doesn't even look like the Ark. The Space Colony Ark has one of the coolest art directions, yet here it looks nothing like it. The really confusing part is that the levels that have you running around outside the Ark actually look like the Ark we saw in Sonic Adventure 2. I don't understand what happened here. This level is awful. I want to go back to the story for a bit, because I want to correct one thing I said. While I do think the execution is terrible, I actually quite like the ideas they were going for. In particular, what this game does for Shadow himself. Part of the reason I find myself so frustrated with the story is that I think there are a few good ideas here that do add nuance to Shadow's character. It just executes on them horribly. So how about we just isolate those ideas from the execution and talk about them as if the game doesn't convey them the way it does. At the core of this game's narrative is Shadow's struggle with identity. It's the whole black-hearted evil, brave-hearted hero shtick being sung about in I Am All of Me. He doesn't know what purpose he's meant to serve, especially after getting amnesia in the beginning of Sonic Heroes. Ultimately, the conflict and arc that Shadow goes through can be broken down into 3 categories, each represented by a different character. One of these characters is Black Doom, the big black alien that first approaches Shadow at the beginning of the game, who is later revealed to have played a critical role in Shadow's creation. While Gerald Robotnik was attempting to create the ultimate life form on the Ark so that he could cure Maria, Black Doom offered him a Faustian deal. Gerald was allowed to use Black Doom's DNA as a base from which he could create this creature. In exchange, this creature would act as Black Doom's champion when he returned in 50 years to invade Earth. In this story, Black Doom represents nature. To him, Shadow is nothing more than an extension of himself, a tool meant to lead his black arms to victory. All of the dark endings, whether pure dark or semi-dark, has Shadow follow Black Doom's orders almost blindly and without question. He's become so desperate for an identity and a purpose that he almost stops thinking for himself. With each ending that gets further and further away from pure dark, Shadow regains more of his autonomy. Yet, in order to gain any dark ending, Shadow must still allow himself to be controlled to some degree. Even in the pure dark hero ending where he usurps Black Doom, he is still ultimately the product of Black Doom. By siding with him, Shadow ultimately sides with the nature of his birth, barely attempting to become something more than what he believes himself to be. In these routes, Shadow doesn't even really learn the circumstances of his creation and his past. All of it is told to him through the lens of Black Doom, who corrupts and simplifies it in order to aim him at specific targets. The second character important to Shadow is the Gun Commander, someone who, despite his importance, didn't even get a canon name until like a month ago. The Gun Commander was born aboard the Ark and had witnessed Shadow's creation. Knowing the truth behind Black Doom's involvement, he had come to fear Shadow, and to this day, believed him to be nothing more than that tool for conquest. While the Gun Commander is one of the most present characters in the game, playing a role in practically every route I can think of, he ultimately exists for one purpose: to be proven right or to be proven wrong. Well, technically this also goes for Black Doom, but whereas Black Doom approaches Shadow in a way that's much more emotionally detached, the Gun Commander is the exact opposite. This is a man whose life has been molded by events he believes to have been caused by Shadow, causing him to react much more emotionally. As a result, he ends up playing the very important role of Perceiver. How he reacts to and views Shadow's actions reflects how the world sees Shadow. When he obeys Black Doom, the commander continues his role as a military leader, acting out the part he's been preparing to play for 50 years, having had his beliefs justified. But when Shadow is more heroic, he attempts to force an altercation to reinforce those beliefs, only to have them further broken by Shadow's continued refusal to entertain them. In the discovery and building of an identity, how others view us can play an important role in the affirming and denying of how we view ourselves. Given how Shadow acknowledges this man's perception of him, it pushes him further towards wanting to atone for everything that's happened because of him. The last and arguably most important category, nurture, can be represented by what is easily the most obviously important character to Shadow: Maria. Gerald Robotnik. Let me explain. While Maria might seem like the obvious choice to represent nurture, I believe that in representing this aspect of Shadow, Gerald is a much better representative. In Sonic Adventure 2, we are only told so much of who Gerald was, while the only thing we're shown is what he had become: a sociopathic terrorist seeking revenge against a world that he felt wronged by. The truth of the matter is that Maria is Shadow's nurturer. She's the one who turns him into more than just a weapon for Black Doom's invasion. Similarly, Gun is Gerald's nurturer. While Gerald is absent for most of Shadow's game, there is one key scene in the game's true ending. A new recording played by Gerald Robotnik is played for all to see, mirroring the recording in SA2 where Gerald causes the Ark to fall out of orbit, as well as showing that the Chaotix actually had some kind of point in this game. In it, we see a version of Gerald from before Gunn attacks the Ark. Here, Gerald is shown to have been someone much more remorseful of what he has done and fully aware of what is to come, having built the Eclipse Cannon specifically for Shadow to use on the Black Comet when it returned. The monster we saw in Sonic Adventure 2 was not what this man always was. While I'm sure this was likely the intention back on the Dreamcast, I feel it wasn't until here it was really made clear. While I will say I think the game goes too far in portraying him as a victim that it feels like it excuses Gerald's later atrocities, these revelations perfectly mirror Shadow's arc throughout the series up to this point, both in terms of paralleling his journey and in terms of flipping it on its head. Gerald started as a man aiming to help the world, only to have been wronged and descended into madness. Shadow started as a tool for conquest, only to be nurtured into something so much more. The fact of the matter is this hedgehog is not as simple as a black-hearted evil or a brave-hearted hero. He's the product of a complicated environment that wanted him to be both destroyer and protector. He's complicated, but it's only through his family does he come to terms with his identity and find a real purpose. And even if it's not told the best, I gotta admit that the ideas behind it all are pretty damn beautiful. After Shadow the Hedgehog, we wouldn't really get a game so instrumental to Shadow as a character for a long time. Sure, he was super important in Sonic 06, but that game just isn't as important to his story. And unfortunately, 06 would be the last time he was really given a ton of focus. As the series went on, Sonic Team would narrow the cast down in each mainline game, only really opening it back up for spin-offs and anniversary titles. Even then, when Shadow appeared, he was heavily flanderized, removing all of the nuance built up in favor of making him nothing more than Sonic's rival. If only there was some kind of successful film franchise based on Sonic with a highly anticipated third entry coming out that adapted Sonic Adventure 2, that would lead to SEGA wanting to synergize by remastering one of the best Sonic games and doubling the size of that game by adding a brand new Shadow-focused campaign that returned him to the Hedgehog everyone fell in love with in the first place. See you in 2 weeks. Subscribe, please.
Run.